Good afternoon, everybody. Congratulations to Emma for running a great first session of this conference. Good afternoon. My name's David Brownhill. I'm a 1998 Nuffield Scholar, also ex-Nuffield Australia Chairman, ex-lots of things for Nuffield, actually, as you've been around for as long as I have. I'd like to thank the partners for this conference, Rabobank, and in particular for me, because I'm a client, probably keeping an eye on me. Keep an eye on Jess G's artistic designs from the first session and also from this session, and they'll also be available afterwards if you want to have a look at that. Once again, as in the first session, please feel free to drop your questions in as the speakers are speaking. What we're going to do, we're going to run through two presentations from previous scholars, and then we'll go to the panel session, and that's where most of the questions will be attended to. The program is tight, as discussed. Good news is we're already running early, which is pretty exciting. So it's as the great Harry Perkins, who was the chair of Nuffield when I came on board, he said, you're either on time or you're late. Well, we're currently early, Harry, so there's one for you. But I'll go straight to Ewan McAsh as our first speaker. Now, Ewan is a trailblazer of the Australian oyster industry. His passion for supporting local farmers and protecting the environment makes him the definition of a modern oyster farmer. After studying marine biology with an interest in aquaculture, he and his father bought an oyster farm on the New South Wales South Coast when he was 24 years old. He is a 2012 Nuffield Scholar and a founder and wholesaler of Signature Oysters, as well as Smart Oysters, a business dedicated to ensuring farmers are digital ready. And his spare time, he just loves to go surfing like a great oyster farmer from the South Coast. Over to you, Ewan.
G'day everybody, my name's Ewan McAsh. I am a 2012 Nuffield Scholar and an oyster farmer from Browley, New South Wales. I studied marine biology at university and I've been oyster farming now for more than 16 years. My scholarship study topic was the importance of strategic planning to grow the oyster industry.
During my travels, I observed that successful businesses and industries were never insular. Cooperatives, partnerships and collaboration were where the big gains were. At Flora Holland, that was the catch cry. First we collaborate and then we compete. And I think this is particularly important for a small industry such as New South Wales Oysters. After 10 years of farming and a Nuffield scholarship, I now realise that my farming business will never truly thrive unless my whole industry is thriving and healthy as well.
What have I been doing since my Nuffield scholarship? Well, I've been launching new companies that solve problems for my farming business, but also for the industry as well. I'm wearing all the hats. Oyster Life, which is how we've scaled up my family farm. It's a share farming company.
I'm Jace Finlay, part owner in Oyster Life. We're a management company, so we operate through a single farm, but share farm with 5 other farmers.
Then we have Signature Oysters, which is our online sales and direct-to-restaurant marketing company. And this company made us particularly resilient during the last 18 months of lockdowns.
We produce oysters to top restaurants. We have about 60 restaurants Australia-wide, and also we sell big volumes to wholesalers.
And Smart Oysters, which is a farm operations application for running smart oyster farms.
Farming is a challenging business, let alone farming underwater. The location, the tide, the wind, waves and weather all provide a unique challenge to every aquaculture farm. Through time, experience and sometimes sheer grit, an oyster farmer will customise their cultivation method, their scheduled tasks of grading, drying and selling in order to solve the unique challenges of their farm location. That is a lot of information for a farmer to remember, but that's exactly what most farmers do. The locations of thousands of oyster baskets, schedules and tasks remembered by one person. I've been an oyster farmer for 15 years. Over that time, I developed better cultivation methods and established new premium markets for my farm. It was during the growth of the business that I discovered the magnitude of the issue I was facing. After years of farming, I had created an environment where I was the only person who truly knew what to do and when to do it. All the history, all the best practice was in my head. I had become trapped as the farm manager, working the business day to day. My efforts to grow the business became a burden, not an opportunity. Smart Oysters doesn't just make farming easier, it changes farmers' lives for better. Productivity and profits then flow from that. Smart Oysters uses GPS maps and customisable reports to capture the farmer's unique farm practice. It notifies you when your next grade is due, it assigns tasks for maintenance, it keeps track of where your gear and oysters are. It helps you bring on new staff. In doing so, Smart Oysters also captures information needed to make the business more efficient, more scalable, more investable. But most importantly, if you're a farmer, it lets you sleep at night. Traditional management systems prioritise the collection of data. Smart Oysters is different. We prioritise the needs of the farmer.
Primarily for me, it's actually knowing what's on those farms. Before, we used to run around on the barge and you get off and you check every row and every bag, every second bag to see what condition they are. This way you don't have to. This way you just punch it up on your phone and away you go.
I can plot this rack's broken and it needs a repair.
But it's the app that doesn't let anything slip by. Nothing's ever going to get left because your app's telling you that this batch in this position is ready to be picked up.
Smart Oyster app captures the way you run the farm and also gives you a snapshot of the total value of your farm. So that's great for being able to go and talk to banks or investors as to being able to raise more capital to grow the business.
Our solution is turning heads in other industries, with pilot programs running on mussel, finfish and seaweed farms. It's exciting to know that these aquaculture industries also need our solution. Smart Oysters' vision is to create a better world, one farm at a time. By this we mean creating better lives, better livelihoods, better produce and a better environment. And that's exactly what Smart Oysters is already doing across the globe today.
One of the challenges my industry faces is access to growth capital. There's huge demand for what we grow, sustainable seafood, and a huge opportunity to grow our production. However, unlike land farming, we cannot use our aquaculture leases as assets to borrow against. How are we going to solve this? Well, we're going to use our farm data and technology to access new, more innovative forms of finance. In fact, we're already started to do this using the Smart Oysters platform.
Eddie, thanks for that. Ewan?
No worries, Dave. There's a lot of learnings I got from Nuffield from travelling the world that have sort of, impregnated into those businesses, I'd say. Yeah.
Can you expand on the Smart Oyster concept for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So Smart Oyster is all about managing oyster farms. It focuses on farm practice, and I think because I'm from a sustainable industry, I'd used a database management system for a decade before Smart Oysters, but they weren't really fit for purpose. It really, they really asked the farmer to conform to a database in order to get the value from the reports that you get about information about your farm. The way we approached it with Smart Oysters is that we actually looked at, and I think this was easier because it's a sustainable industry in that we don't have inputs. To grow great oysters, it's all about labour. We don't have to feed them, we don't have to treat them. We just have to look after them for often a very long time, up to 2.5, 3 years, in order to grow great oysters. So we really focus on that farm activity. What do you need to do and when do you need to do it? And that's something that's unique. We call it unique farm practice. Each farmer, whether they're in oysters and whether they're on the land, they learn over time how to farm their patch of water. So with Smart Oysters, we've got the GPS maps that help you navigate around the farm, but the real key to it is actually going to the farmer, asking them how they farm, and then actually customizing the app to collect, the information they require, using the language they use and the schedules they use in order to know when to go back and do what they know they need to do. So with that in mind, and I can't take all the credit for that, I've got great co-founders. We sort of tackled Smart Oysters, but in doing it for oysters, we're actually finding that, very transferable to seaweed, mussels, and in fact, I've got a pilot running on a vineyard, and even like yourself, David, I've had broadacre farmers say, hey, we need something like this, which amazed me. You guys have got, precision agriculture, you've got agronomists, you've got remote sensing, but I think what Smart Oysters does is really recognise that,
there's just those little tasks, those everyday tasks that, you know, farmers tend to remember, and, you know, you don't need to. You know, that was the lesson I learned over many years, is that I put a lot of energy. I worked 7 days a week into learning how to farm and growing my farm, but then I became trapped as the manager. In the last 2 years, using Smart Oysters, I've been able to sort of hand over that farming IP, that farm practice, to my brothers-in-law, who you saw featured in that film. They now produce twice as many oysters than I ever did when I worked 7 days a week. The oysters are better quality, they're more profitable, the business is more profitable, and they only work 4 days a week. You know, they took a day to look after them. We've all got young families, so we focused on that, really, you know, looking after our families and spending that time with family. So pretty amazing what, you know, in terms of innovation, pretty amazing what you can do with a bit of tech.
Absolutely. So if and it's all under this innovation banner. So if I start up a new oyster farm down the road from you, I grab your app, you come and ask me what I'm going to do. How long does this process take before it's set up and running, and I'm operational?
Yeah, 48 hours. So there's a process in terms of actually, you know, mapping your farm. It's usually on the farmer. It's actually that the longest it takes is how long it takes to get that information down to the farmer. So mapping your farm and then customizing those fields and reports. You know, I think our first farm took 4 days to onboard and customize. Now we can do it within 40 minutes.
Excellent. So if someone, is there a cost to it, and who pays?
Yeah, so it's a subscription service. So farmers pay on a monthly basis, you know, based on the size of their farm and how many users they have. A typical, like, small oyster farmer would pay $150 a month, and, you know, and then larger farmers, it sort of goes up from that. To give everyone some background, we've got more than, so Smart Oysters is 4 years old, but it's only been commercially available for the last 2 years. We've got more than 60 farmers using it around the world, and the US is our largest market. So we've got farmers in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Ireland, the US. And everyone's on that sort of subscription basis. We're looking to grow, working with seaweed farms, mussel farms. What I do know, and what we designed Smart Oysters for, and from a data perspective, is that we knew we had to create more value than just a farm management tool. So even though there's great value for a farmer in terms of using Smart Oysters, but built into the platform is the ability to integrate other data sources, from sensors to share data. So we want to be able to share up the supply chain for traceability or certification of provenance. And as I briefly mentioned, we're also looking to see if we can. We're using farm data and how farmers can show how robustly they're farming to actually de-risk operations and get more innovative sources of finance. So yeah. It starts with the app, but the data and that sort of data economy and what we can do, that's where the great value Smart Oysters has.
And what about, have you got competitors in this marketplace now?
There's a few out there. It was interesting when I first, I didn't go out, when I went first look over my journey as a farmer, I started, you know, with the old Nokia phones. And I think, you know, over a decade, you know, I started using a smartphone, and I was doing emails and doing everything you could from the smartphones. This is about 4 years ago. And it was at that time I said, surely there's got to be a solution. Surely I could manage my oyster farm using my phone. And I went looking for a solution. At that time, there was none. So that's why I was set on this journey to actually develop one. By the time we'd actually developed and launched, there was nearly 4 applications available around the world. But Smart Oysters is the only one that's running global, and actually only recently our biggest competitor in the US has just pivoted away from farm management. So yeah, we're the leading software provider for oysters and aquaculture.
Question came out as, how secure is your app?
That's a good question. The question we get asked a lot by farmers. Everyone's worried about privacy. We've got all the usual sort of safeguards in place in terms of data security on the cloud. But interestingly enough, with the app, you were just collecting data. You're just collecting what you're doing in terms of tasks. It's what you do with that information
is where the real value lies, and that actually comes back to the farmer. So yeah, it's as secure as you can get, but really for farmers, it's your land, it's where you're farming, and what you can do with the information we provide from the app. That's the IP. That's very hard to steal from any farmer.
Absolutely. And sort of a secondary question to that too is that, and you talked about how you can't borrow against leases, so back to more to your business and how your business operates. There's a question from Mark Grote, which is how does Smart Oysters increase access to capital, and how do banks, etc., react to this sort of technology?
They're usually fairly good in terms of they can. What Smart Oysters does is give a whole lot more visibility to what farmers are doing. Real-time inventory, real-time activity, farm activity. I can show you the dashboard right now. You can see, I could show you the farm activity happening on my farm as guys drop off oysters and pick stuff up and maintain equipment. But again, that's probably not enough to get the banks over the line. They still want to, borrow against the house or those secure traditional assets. But I'll tell you who is really interested and where we are finding that alternative finance from is from the people we talked about earlier in the session, in terms of people who are interested in sustainability, people who want to know where their food is from. So the investors, in one sense, I've got a pilot going on an Oyster Life farm at the moment where we've actually had investors buy crops of oysters, or portions of crops. So they buy a portion of the crop, we hold it and bring it to a premium price, and then we sell it, and then we share the profit with the investor. So the other way we're looking at to get more innovative finance is by the lease or rent equipment, the productive assets to farmers based on how robustly they farm, based on their stock inventory, based on the things that actually relate to how productive their farm is, as opposed to their asset base, which in terms of most aquaculture farms, my farm in particular, my farm was a good example where for the first 10 years, I grew my farm borrowing against my parents' property, which is extremely stressful. And then when I had the choice whether I, borrow against my family home to go to the next level, I chose not to. Instead, we've got investors involved in Oyster Life to do that.
Yeah, good stuff, Ewan. Righto, as we're short of time, thanks for that. I think there's really quick take-home messages there is oyster farming, all you Nuffield scholars, anyone else out there, is a 4-day-a-week job. Sounds like a pretty good job to get into. You can live near the water, drive a boat every day. Thanks, Ewan. We'll come back to you in the panel session. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's a 2014 Nuffield Scholar, Paul Niven. He studied management systems and price risk management for multi-site dairy operations. Paul moved to China in 2015, where he established and led the Pure Source Dairy business, a joint venture between Fonterra and Abbott, with 8,000 cows, which is actually a downsize compared to what he was doing in Tasmania at 25,000 cows. He now leads the dairy consultancy practice for Asian Agribusiness Consulting, working with large-scale dairies in China to build new farms and improve performance. He has a Bachelor in Veterinary Science, a Master's of Veterinary Science, an MBA from somewhere in the UK. But probably the most interesting thing I found out about Paul, who's currently 47 years old, he plays AFL for the Beijing Bombers, and he also still plays rugby union for the Beijing Aardvarks at 47. So ladies and gentlemen, Paul Niven.
Thank you very much, David. Look, firstly, thank you to Nuffield for this opportunity. I'm dialing in today from a place called Balto in Inner Mongolia. It's the second biggest city behind Ho-Ho-Hot. And I've been up here looking at some dairy farms yesterday and also speaking at a conference about managing reproduction on dairy farms. As David introduced, as David said in my introduction, I've been here now for about 6.5 years, and I was thinking about heading back to Australia. Obviously, COVID has made what was my normal life of going back to Australia 4 times a year almost impossible. Last year, I went back and did my 2 weeks quarantine in Australia and then came back to China in January of this year and did 3 weeks. And during that time of 3 weeks quarantine, I realized that the number of foreigners in China has now gone from about 5 million before COVID down to about 800,000. And there is still a huge knowledge gap, particularly in agriculture. And that really leads me into this topic today, which is around innovation and infrastructure. So on our first slide there, there's three things I'd like to share with you today. The first one is around the adoption of some of the technologies. So firstly, here is some of the technology that's being used. So this was earlier this year. As we all know, drones are a very useful tool in agriculture. And here in China, they've now started being used for spraying of crops, particularly for herbicides and some pesticides. So this is spraying a wheat crop a few months ago. And as you can see here, good little drone happily spraying a crop. And on the surface, you think, oh, great, there's some good technology being adopted here. Now, if we go to the next slide, you can see behind my colleague there in the high-vis vest, you can see a little truck. So they basically have two drones per truck. They have a structure within it, and they mix up their chemicals, as you can see there, using no PPE, no real dilution rates. It's a splash of this and a splash of that. And unfortunately, you see a wonderful technology like a drone that is not being used very well. But then if you look further, and if we look at the next slide, here they are mixing up the water. So this is it's a man-made waterway, but it's a ditch. There are fish that live in this ditch, and old mate's down there mixing up his pesticide, which I think was imidacloprid, with a plastic bag, submersing that into the water. So unfortunately, you can see that behind the scenes, we have a lot more work to do. And obviously, as soon as I saw this, I went over, I stopped this guy immediately from working and explained that there is no way in the world that we need to be, or that we should be doing this. So the adoption of innovation is one thing, but if we do not actually address, and I really found the last presentation about managing the workflow, managing our people on the oyster farm, very similar to this type of thing. We can deploy drones, but if we're going to potentially wipe out all the fish in this little ditch here, we're doing very bad things. So innovation is one thing, but without the knowledge and the skills of what we're actually doing and changing the behind the scenes activities, we're not going to make any progress. This is a few months ago. This is in July, harvesting our wheat. Now, there's nothing too special about harvesting wheat in China, but when they do it, because we harvest all our wheat literally in about a week-long period, that little field that's about 100 acres has 7 harvesters going in it at the same time. And it's an absolute chaotic event. And again, this creates an absolute nightmare for us in terms of health and safety. These harvesters are just out harvesting wheat, and they go in any direction and every direction. So again, we've got good technology that doesn't do a bad job, but we've got lack of organisation of our people through that work. So we might be definitely deploying some smart oyster technology to try and manage this a little better. So again, we go and we produce this wonderful food, and then literally they dump it on a slab of concrete. And sometimes it'll get rained on, sometimes it will get exposed to pests, whether they be rodents or insects. And again, the challenges around food security, and I recently saw some information about food loss of harvested food relative to then consumed food. Australia is one of the worst. We waste about 100 kilos per person per year. China is actually very high as well. It's around 60. And some of the leading countries are those in Africa, where they're far more, I suppose, sensitive to any food loss, and they're sort of around 10. But there are so many more innovative things that we can do just to manage our wheat harvest. And this is one of my favorite shots. Here we have, this is one of our cropping supervisors. Halfway through harvest, he goes and buys half a dozen watermelons and pulls them all out and shares them with the boys. So I've never actually had a watermelon at wheat harvest before, but it was definitely a great thing. Okay, so now let's look now into the new farms and desert recovery. So I moved now, those first shots of the wheat are in Shandong, which is in the east of China, about a 500 mil rainfall zone, summer dominant and double crop. So wheat in the winter, corn in the summer. This video is over in a place called Zhangye, which is in Gansu province, which is next to Xinjiang. You can see here on the edge of town, this is an environment that has literally been built in the last 20 years. In the foreground is a high-speed train. These are the trains that run at 300 kilometers an hour and literally go right up the center of the country. And Gansu actually borders Mongolia. It goes into the foreign country. And you can hop on that train, and if the borders were open, you could actually go into Mongolia. This area is incredible. It reminds me a little bit of California. And so the image is very hard to look at, but that white on the top, and this was taken in May, that is all snow on Alps up on the range. And down in front, you've got an elevated alpine desert. And the rainfall here is about 200 mils per year, but they're able to grow things here solely because of the water that's available. But this area has been a desert for hundreds and hundreds of years. It has not been caused by bad farming practices or other things, but in this part of the country, they are now transforming this through rehabilitation of this land. On the next slide, we can see some of the projects. So firstly, this is what the code looks like when you drive across it. So this is how they start to rehabilitate these dunes and desert areas. It is horrendously labor intensive, and they start by dividing it up, as you can see, putting up little fences and then running trickle irrigation to start to grow things. After about 2 years, they start growing trees, and we'll see that on the next slide. And there are actually programs whereby people can invest in their tree. So we've all heard about Jack Ma and Alibaba. Alibaba has an option to donate some of your credits, like your frequent flyer points or your bank points, to buy trees and rehabilitate desert land. So there is a very, very large scale and very, very socially enabled movement in China to rehabilitate this type of land that, as I said, has been desert for hundreds of years. It hasn't been destroyed. If we then go to the next slide, what are they then doing with this land? This is the middle of nowhere getting invited to a groundbreaking ceremony for a new dairy farm. You can't tell, but that day is 40 degrees. And this is literally in the middle of the desert. So this is what it looks like. This is where they're putting the dairy farm.
From Zhangye.
Lovely ladies in beautiful gold dresses. And in the next slide, you will see the dialer crowd who were all brought in on buses to the middle of nowhere for the ceremony that went for about an hour and a half. So you can see infrastructure firsthand getting built and utilizing land that is honestly very, very unproductive. But they are utilizing the water that they have. They are rehabilitating this, and they'll be growing corn on this land in about 2 years. So that's the timeline that they put upon this on top of the rehabilitation. But it is done with very cheap labor and very labor intensive. We've got two extremes here. This is a silage bunker with about 20,000 tons of corn in it, perfectly harvested with class harvesters, beautifully kernel crushed. See, there's an army of people, ensuring that the silage is, and you can't see it from the image, but there's oxygen barrier plastic. This silage is as good as you'll make anywhere. And then if we look at the next slide, these guys are on a bridge, just driving over the river with their truckload of silage. China still remains, on one hand, absolute development and high technology, and on the other hand, basic subsistence farming from probably the 1950s in China. So we've still got the two extremes. But probably the funnest part of my job, the things that I get to do and see here in China, this was a meal with a family, which was just fantastic, and invited into their home, and very enjoyable. And on the final slide, when China opens its borders, probably the middle of next year, you can all come to Zhangye and have a look. They have this beautiful area called the Rainbow Mountains, and it is just absolutely amazing. This is over probably a 5,000 hectare area of these mountains. So it's just spectacular. So guys, look, thank you again for inviting me along. And I just wanted to show you the two extremes here of China, from the technology and the lack of technology and the expansion and the opportunity that still exists here in China. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that little quick snapshot of what you've actually been seeing and looking at in China. What we'll do is I'm going to move on to the 2019 scholars for their panel session. There'll be questions back to you, Paul, and Ewan, no doubt, and there's already a couple in the barrel there. But I'd like just to ask the 2019 scholars, the last of the travellers, as they call themselves at the moment, but don't worry, 2020 and 21 and 22, you'll all get your chance, hopefully. I'd just like them to introduce them one by one, talk a bit about their study topic, their outcomes as part of the theme of the SDG9, and the industry innovation and infrastructure. So if I can call on you, Andrew Sargent, to lead the way, please.
Andrew Sargent from Crystal Brook in South Australia. We run a broadacre cropping property in the mid-north. And yeah, I own or manage that in partnership with my parents. And yeah, so I looked at open source technology for agriculture and how we could bring some of that stuff from other tech industries into ag, which has predominantly been a fairly proprietary sort of closed source industry. I found that, yeah, there is opportunities to bring a bit of that into ag, and it's probably going to be driven by growers. Manufacturers obviously have an incentive to keep their IP to themselves, which up until now has probably stifled innovation and made progress fairly slow as far as ag tech goes. So I think, yeah, as far as the SDG goes, for us to build resilient infrastructure, an open source approach is going to help. It's going to make stuff more future-proofed and able to get more people involved. Yeah, since I finished my scholarship, I've tried to implement some open source auto steer and some farm management software just to try and, I guess, make it a bit easier going forwards, so that our data is a bit more accessible for us later on.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. We'll move on to Tom Moore from New South Wales.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, David. Yeah, my name's Tom Moore. I'm a 2019 scholar. I was sponsored by the Royal Agricultural Society Foundation. I'm from Tenterfield, northern New South Wales. With my wife and I, we produce and sell our own free-range eggs. We started the business in 2016 from nothing, and we've now got 8,000 hens and 5 staff, and we supply around 50 different businesses in the district. And just at the moment, we are planning the next steps of growth for our business. And with the nature of the business and the infrastructure that we have, you can't just organically grow like any normal business would. So, well, I suppose farming's much like that, but we'll probably be having to double our business if we want to make any investment at all. My study topic was to look into the future housing systems of free-range egg production, which connects quite nicely to SDG9. Innovation and infrastructure has been a focus of our business from the beginning and will continue to be in the future. We've always looked to have the latest equipment, trying to use it to its potential to deliver better outcomes for the hens. My Nuffield travels took me through Asia and Europe, where my eyes was opened, as Paul was saying, to see how 1 billion people need feeding in China in pretty much whatever way possible, to the highest welfare standards in Europe, producing a high welfare, very high cost option for the customers that can afford it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. We're now, hopefully if they're online, I can't see them, we're going to find out here either. Natasha, you're online to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm 2019 scholar. I am a certified organic vegetable grower. We have 2 farms in Baxter and New South Wales, Mornington Peninsula and New South Wales. We've grown from 3 acres in 2009 with just ourselves farming to 160 acres in current times with 40 employees. My topic for my study was looking for alternatives to plastic packaging on fresh produce. So as a supplier to major supermarkets in Australia and being organic, every product is required to be wrapped in plastic. and most of our organic customers do not like plastic. So I travelled 19 countries in 19 weeks in 2019 and the start of 2020 trying to find this. And yeah, my topic changed, and the outcome I thought I was going to find when I started off on my ventures with COVID and everything like that completely changed my perception and my silver bullet, I guess, with the outcomes.
Excellent. Beck, are you online?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm remote today and away from my office, so yeah, just getting used to some different technology. But thank you. My topic for the Nuffield was optimising beef genetic selection in Northern Australia in particular, because there's a lot less uptake in the north compared to the south. I travelled to 15 countries, to the South Americas and Kenya and through Europe, and also to Canada and the US. So quite a good snapshot of what's happening in those fields, and especially across different protein production systems, so not just beef. Currently, I'm operating from Augathella, which is out in Western Queensland near Charleville. Dan and I will make 1,500 females this year, and since Nuffield and all of my learnings, we will capture data this year, in particular on our core focus breeding herd of 200 head with phenotype and genotypes. So yeah, looking at capturing DNA and getting genomics on those cattle, and looking at diagnostic traits such as horn and poll, but also yeah, getting EBVs on those cattle as well.
Excellent. Righto, thank you very much. Well, if we can revert back to you, Paul, just as a question there to talk a little bit more about what you're doing. I have one straight off the bat. What exactly were the drones spraying in the wheat crop?
That is a very good question as to what they were spraying. So I'm going to mix your question with the question on the chat. So the government actually mandates certain things to be sprayed for. So they worry about large builds up of insects. And so this was for thrips and for any other insects we could kill. Now, these guys come from a different perspective than we do in Australia. We've introduced this new concept called economic thresholds to spray crops, and also to kill weeds in crops. So it's usual that these farmers in Shandong would only have half an acre. And so they will overspray, and they will use every herbicide, every pesticide they possibly can, because their objective is to maximize the amount of food that they get from a small area. So the cost of the spraying is sometimes paid for by government, and usually the herbicide is provided. And again, to the question that was sort of asked on the chat, so the government from time to time tells you that you have to spray your corn crop, say for Heliothus, or your wheat crop for different pests. Last year, they got all excited about rust. And we chose a wheat variety that was quite rust resistant. And I told them we were not spraying for rust. And they got very, very, very upset because there had been large areas of rust in villages, in villages cropping. So you do sometimes have your hand forced, but if it's done, and I don't like this approach, but if it's done at no cost to your business, then sometimes you just, I wouldn't like to use the term roll over, but sometimes you choose which fights you're going to have.
Just as a secondary question there to that, Paul, can you speak a little bit about the independence and flexibility that there is in Chinese farming and the decision-making in relative to the Chinese government? Can you just expand on that a little, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think part of it is sometimes there's no flexibility. They tell you that you're going to spray for rust and you have to spray for rust. But I think Tom Moore just said it very beautifully, that generally the Chinese approach to food production is do whatever way is possible to make food, you can make food. So within reason, there's a large amount of independence. There's no real direct central government control on what farmers do or don't do, other than two things. One is the law. So there are very strict food safety rules, particularly around the production of milk, following the large and terrible melamine issues back in the late noughties. So food quality and safety are paramount, but actually the monitoring of the on the ground, particularly in terms of row crops, cereals, is not very well monitored. It's usually done at harvest, and it's done on residue testing. And what usually happens is when they find wheat or corn with higher residues than they like for human consumption, that food that then gets moved into animals. The second thing that the Chinese government do is they do heavily manipulate the market with, you can call them subsidies, but I'd call them more financial incentives. So 3 years ago, they had a very active program which was called Grain to Green, and that was to encourage farmers to make corn silage rather than to make corn for kernel. So they subsidised every tonne of silage that you made by 50 RMB, which is 10 Aussie dollars, that basically brought the two things in line. So that was to incentivise farmers to make more fodder and make less corn, because at that stage, the corn supply in China was well above excess and their central reserves were full. So they'll do that type of thing. 2 years ago, they did the same thing on soya beans. Everybody went and planted lots of soya beans. Last year, there were no financial incentives. And something that I do like to share with everybody is that there are no taxes on agriculture in China.
Wow. There we go. We might move to China. Natasha, we might just flick to you. You mentioned a requirement of supermarkets wanting to supply plastics, yet we've got to pay for our plastic bags these days from the supermarkets. But how are you going in relation to packaging and supermarkets, and who's working with you, who's not?
Yeah, good question, Dave. So we supply to the largest supermarkets in Australia. One of those supermarkets is not looking at alternative, like compostable packaging at this stage, purely due to the fact that it will mess up the recycling stations if we happen to put a compostable plastic in with your general plastics. So that's their stance on that one. Another supermarket, I do believe, is trialling a compostable starch plastic, which is slightly cloudier, less transparent than your regular plastic. And it seems to be well received from customers. I found that with COVID-19, where before customers didn't want plastic on their produce, now they're actually quite comfortable to have plastic on their produce, purely from a point of view where customers can't touch it or cough on it or, spread the germs across that. So I'm looking to see the space where this apple producer is currently using the compostable plastic, just to see how that's received by the supermarket and whether they'll allow us to then try that as well. But at the moment, we're on the back bench waiting for our turn to at least try that.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question to you, Paul, in terms of your own health and welfare. This is from Bernadette in New South Wales. Your own health and welfare. Do you eat the Chinese produced food or imported food? And are you concerned about your own health as a result of some of the choices made by the local farmers?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And to be fair, I drink Aussie milk. And to be fair, there's a lot of very good quality milk made in China. And sometimes I drink local fresh milk, but to be honest, I like Australian UHT milk. I eat a fair bit of beef that's imported from Australia or from Argentina. And I used to drink Aussie wine, but the tariffs have got a little silly, so it's got quite expensive. When it comes to vegetables, it's very difficult. And it's about making sure you clean them properly. And there are various both chemicals, which does sound a little bit silly, but also things like UV lights to kill the bugs. When I first got to China, I was less concerned about the herbicides and the pesticides. I was more concerned to know that human manure is one of the best things for growing green leafy vegetables. And one of my colleagues ended up with a good case of Giardia as a consequence of eating out in rural China. So I am mindful of it. I really try not to eat fish in China. That's probably from a heavy metals perspective. So yeah, I'm mindful of it, but to be honest, the conference I'm at, I eat what's presented to me.
Okay. Question to you, Beck. What do you think are the main barriers to adoption of your findings for Northern Australian beef producers?
There's quite a few factors at play for the barriers for adoption for northern producers, but firstly would have to be scale. Southern Australia's had a bigger adoption on the measurement or the phenotyping of their cattle because they've got smaller herds and smaller paddocks. So therefore it's easier to capture that information, especially when we've got to do it in such a labour intensive manner. The exciting thing though that I saw in my research was basically all of the automated phenotyping that researchers are working on, but a lot of that's happening in Australia already. So with that, we'd be able to measure our cattle a lot more effectively and with less labour and more accurately. However, just the return on investment probably is one of those limiting factors, Dave. It's they're quite costly at the moment, and we're still working on making it easy to analyse all of that data that's captured. But there are research projects out there that I've collaborated with since returning home, such as the Repronomics project, and working with the University of Queensland on some genotyping. So at this point, just working with the researchers is what I've been doing until it does become more mainstream.
Okay, tremendous. Question to you, Andrew. If open source technology is going to be driven by farmers, then how is scaling going to occur?
Yeah, thanks for that, Emma. I guess when I say driven by farmers, I guess as consumers, we've got to push the manufacturers to provide solutions that are open source, that are more compatible. I mean, we've been battling with manufacturers for over 20 years, trying to get compatibility between brands and even between same products of the same brand. So until there's a viable option for farmers to say, well, look, I'm going to go that way rather than use your product, there's no real incentive for manufacturers. But I guess the beauty of tech is that it is fairly easy to scale. And once you've got a solution that works in an industry, you can scale that across an industry. You just copy paste and away you go. So it's probably one of the easier things to scale. Of course, there'll be variations between different industries, but it's something that can scale fairly well, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Just a secondary question: how are we going to convince the big companies like Case and John Deere to open source their information, their technology, for us to do what we want?
I don't know. You tell me.
You did the study.
I guess we need an alternative, and we need to get them to come to the table, and I guess make it seem less of I guess for them at the moment, they can hold market share by having their systems closed in. It's changing now. Like since I started my study, 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, it's changed a lot in the last 12 months even. There's a lot more interoperability between brands. Now they've moved to the cloud. There's a lot of brands that are working on connections between different platforms to allow you to share your data between each platform. But I think if we can get some better standards between brands and with data formats to get rid of a common standard, it's going to save a lot of that conversion from one type to another and just make the whole thing a lot more efficient, a lot more flexible. So I can actually start getting some of the benefits from big data that everyone keeps spruiking.
So we'll move on probably to you, Tom. What was the key finding or the key eureka moment, to use Emma's question, across the board? What was the eureka moment of your travels to help you with your business and your industry?
Really, for me, it was to watch your back, because if caged production is gotten rid of, whether that's through a ban or through voluntary changeover to a different type of equipment, then all of a sudden we're likely to be the commodity egg. So if you're not competitive in the market now, God help you in the future. That was a big one, because the free range market in Europe is enormous, but no one's making any money, and the welfare is very good too, and the equipment's up to date, and it has to be, but it is very, very cutthroat. It was to be honest a little intimidating.
Okay, well, there's a secondary question there too. How do the free range sheds compare to caged birds in terms of carbon footprint and production efficiencies?
Oh, well, not good. The cage systems trump free range in most measures. They've even measured stress in the albumin of the egg, so without interfering with the bird at all. And cage topped all production methods, but they don't like to talk about that. And then from a carbon perspective, soil degradation in the range area for free range is a major problem. And it's something that we have to deal with almost continuously, taking away manure, trying to stop topsoil erosion, and then run off into streams and that sort of thing. Yeah, there's some real issues, and you've got to stay on top of it.
Thanks for that one. There was another one back here for you, Paul, which is from Robin Che from South Australia. China's been buying a huge amount of corn over the last 12 months. What's your take on this? Is it because of declining Chinese corn stock due to drought and flooding, or because of increased animal feed use?
Yeah, so there's three things that are happening. The first one is that African swine fever is now under control in China, and they're probably sitting at 80 to 90% of the pre-African swine fever sow numbers. So that has created an inflection in the bottom, and now we're heading back up towards peak pig numbers. So that has then put an additional strain on the supply. The second thing, and this is a more recent phenomenon. So again, the corn is getting harvested now all across northern China. There has been an exceptional amount of rain. It's the wettest summer in Beijing for over 50 years. Usual Beijing annual rainfall is about 400 to 450 mils. It falls in May, June, July, August, a little bit into September. This year there's been 850 mils. So Shandong, where I used to be, is 500 kilometres south. Usually we would have harvested our corn crop by about the 5th of October. It is not harvested yet. So there are massive amounts of corn in China, probably in the north, maybe 20% that won't be harvested at all. So that will put a big deficit in the local production. The third thing is post-COVID, all feeds have gone up. And just again, to put some direct numbers on it, a tonne of corn silage in 2019 was about 430 RMB. You can divide that by 5 for Aussie dollars. This year, it's about 550 to 600. So that's just on the ground demand. So yeah, a lot of factors. The thing to really watch now, I was talking to a friend in Western Australia. I think Australian lupins are about to have a good run. Soya beans are disproportionately expensive. If a trader can get their act together and get some lupins definitely into China or across the world, there's money to be made.
Natasha, do you have a eureka moment for your travels?
Lightning moment that hit me was when I was in Denmark, and I came across a startup company which was funded or received a grant from National Geographic, and they were making like an EcoFlex plastic made from food scraps. So companies like PepsiCo and Boost, all the food scraps and everything like that, they were able to make like a cellulose layer, which they've turned into an EcoFlex plastic, which is sort of like a cling film or stretch wrap. And I just thought that was amazing. Rather than growing crops and crops of corn or potatoes or maize to make plastic out of, like, which is a lot of. There's one thing that came up with my studies was that people say, well, you've got to grow food to make a food product, like a plastic product. So I think the lightning moment for me was finding this product that was actually made from food scraps, the stuff that would have gone otherwise into a tip or a waste dump. So I just thought that was pretty good technology.
Yeah, can you expand on the fact that you're in New York when the lockdown began with COVID?
So I did have a couple of appointments lined up with farmers and a plastic company over in New York that were making innovations over there. And I was in New York City. I'd gotten there on the Monday, and on the Tuesday, New York went into lockdown. So I got to see New York, Times Square when it's really, really busy. And then I got to see it the next day with 6 people in the city, which was quite surreal, quite scary, quite spooky. It felt like there were going to be riots and things like that. So I was very lucky to get on a flight 2 days later to come home and have my nice, quiet, mandatory isolation on the farm.
Yeah, okay. Tom, what was the major innovation you saw?
Multi-level housing, really. So basically a technology that was invented to help the cage boys move away from cages and go into a multi-tiered system, which actually benefits the birds in lots of ways, whether it's flying, perching, the hierarchy reiteration, so dominant birds live up in the top and the less dominant birds can live down the bottom. Yeah, very interesting stuff, and lots of IP around that with farm managers that know how to use it, and then a lot of people that don't know how to use it and they try and use it like a traditional system and it doesn't work at all. I think the Americans are going through that at the moment with their expansion of cage-free production. Yeah, so that was it for me.
Yeah, just a final question to all of you. Do you think innovation sometimes slows production or speeds it up?
I'll go first if no one's jumped in. For the egg production, you're actually with new investment and the latest equipment, you're seeing lower cost of production, higher productivity, and a better welfare outcome for the hen. So if you can afford to do it, it's a no-brainer.
Anyone else? Andrew, you got a comment?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Yeah, I think with any innovation, there's always hurdles, there's always challenges. So I guess in the short term, you're going to see maybe not so much a reduction in production, but there'll be challenges. But if we don't address those challenges, then we're never going to go forward. So yeah, I think in the long term, we need innovation.
Okay, well, good. Well, I'd just like to thank you guys. Congratulations on all your studies, all your outcomes. Thanks for being part of the conference today. Thanks for the good discussion. Particularly, I'd like to thank Ewan and Paul for doing their presentations. You can contact them directly. You can either do it through Nuffield or just direct to them if you'd like to get in touch. If you have any more questions, any more things you'd like to talk about. We're now going to watch a video that's been pre-recorded from Roger Mercer, who's a 1986 UK scholar, chairman of Mercer Farming, past chair of Nuffield International, also a very good friend of mine. And Roger will outline 70 years of what's happened with Nuffield and Nuffield Australia. So away we go.
Hello to everyone at the conference, and particularly to all recent scholars. Many congratulations on you achieving your awards. You can certainly look forward to your involvement in Nuffield, enriching your life in a major way. I was introduced to Nuffield at the age of 30 after having met Dan Donovan from Australia and Dave Hurst from New Zealand, who in 1984 who were doing their Nuffield tour in the UK. As a result, it encouraged me to attend various UK events, which ultimately led me to apply and achieve a scholarship in 1986. And I went and studied pigs, potatoes and farm management in North America. Without doubt, it broadened my horizons hugely and led me directly to expanding both in the UK and farming in Eastern Europe, growing potatoes in Hungary for a few years and investing in Poland, and then buying land in New South Wales, which we had for 12 years and we sold it a couple of years ago. I've always found Nuffield to be a huge source of advice and information over the years. I was later fortunate to be asked to chair Nuffield International and had the pleasure of meeting many young scholars at the start of their journey in different locations around the world. I mention my own experience with Nuffield only to highlight that it really is a life-changing experience. It requires you to put effort in, and if you do so, you're going to be richly rewarded. The experiences gained and the contacts made all add up to a fabulous experience, and this never ends. The reach of Nuffield is enormous in that you not only have all the alumni in all sorts of prominent positions, but the reputation of Nuffield opens many doors and creates opportunity. Nuffield has been a major source of progression in our industry since its inception by William Morris, Lord Nuffield, in 1947, and it continues to evolve and adapt over the years, both within individual countries as well as internationally.
Hi everybody! team.
Hey fellow scholars.
What's up, y'all?
Yeah, hi everyone.
Hi.
Kia ora.
Hello everyone. My name is Victor, I'm from Brazil.
Hi, I'm Alison Larard.
Hi, my name's Kate and I'm a 2018 Nuffield Scholar from New Zealand.
I'm Klaus Leitenberger, one of the Irish Nuffield Scholars.
And just like the rest of you, a proud Nuffield Scholar.
The creation of Nuffield International by member countries in 2011 is a prime example of this evolution. A huge amount of effort went into setting it up, and many thanks must go to all those involved, particularly Jim Gelch and Peter Nixon. It is now ably chaired by Andrew Fowler, with Jodie Redcliffe as CEO and Mike Vacher as CFO. It has helped widen the Nuffield network, and the involvement of new countries enriches the experience for all scholars and widens Nuffield's reach even further. The addition of Brazil, USA, South Africa, Chile, Japan and Germany over recent years has widened Nuffield's footprint enormously. The work done by Nuffield International supports the development of individuals in agriculture around the world, giving Nuffield scholars the confidence, knowledge and network to step up as leaders at home and on the global stage. Nuffield International is also represented at the United Nations Committee for Food Security, being the only farmer organisation represented there. Nuffield also continues to develop in individual countries in different ways. Also, the development of the CSC and the Global Focus Programme and all the other changes within individual countries help progress the organisation to where it is today. This enormous reach of Nuffield, both nationally and internationally, and its ability to change and adapt, help it move towards its goals and ultimately, hopefully, create a better world. We are all very fortunate to be part of this family, and it is incumbent on us all to make the most of it. I hope you have a great conference and best wishes to you all for the future.
Terrific. Thank you, Roger, for that. That concludes this afternoon's session. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. There's a survey to be filled in so we get some feedback. But anyway, the same time tomorrow, 1 o'clock tomorrow, there'll be another exciting line of speakers, including Idaho rancher Dick Whitman and 2009 Kenyan-based scholar now, Australian scholar Stuart Barton, as well as from the CSIRO, Research Director of Farming Systems, Jen Taylor. And also we'll be hearing from another group of the 2019 scholars. So thank you all for all your participation. Thank you for your questions, and I hope you've enjoyed your afternoon. Thanks very much.